The Copa room at the Sands Hotel was packed on the night of February 12, 1962. Every seat filled, every table reserved weeks in advance. Every eye focused on the stage, where Dean Martin stood under a single spotlight. Halfway through, That's Amore. It was the kind of performance Dean had done 1,000 times. Smooth, effortless, the audience eating out of his hand. He was at the peak of his powers, the king of Las Vegas, untouchable. And then Sam Giancana walked in. Sam didn't walk quietly. He never did. He arrived with an entourage of 8 men, all in expensive suits, all radiating the kind of menace that made people instinctively move out of the way. The maitre d' rushed over, nervous, trying to find seats for them, even though the show had already started and the room was at capacity. Sam waved him off and simply took a table near the front, displacing the people who'd been sitting there. Nobody complained. Nobody ever complained when Sam Giancana wanted something. Dean saw him arrive. Everyone on stage saw him. Frank Sinatra, sitting at a side table watching his friend perform, tensed visibly. Sam Giancana was the boss of the Chicago outfit, one of the most powerful mobsters in America, and he had a reputation for volatility. When Sam was happy, he was generous and charming. When Sam was angry, people disappeared. And right now, Sam looked angry. Dean kept singing. What else could he do? He was mid-performance, under contract, with 2,800 people watching. He hit the final note of That's Amore, and the audience erupted in applause. Dean bowed, smiled, and prepared to launch into his next song. That's when Sam Giancana stood up. "Hey, Dean!" Sam's voice cut through the applause like a knife. The room went silent. Every head turned toward Sam. Dean's smile froze on his face. "Yeah, Sam?" Dean said carefully, keeping his tone light. "That was terrible," Sam said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You sounded like a dying cat. What happened to you, Dean? You used to be good." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Nobody insulted Dean Martin, not in his own show, not in front of an audience, and certainly not by calling his performance terrible. Dean stood there, holding the microphone, trying to process what had just happened. Was this a bit? Some kind of joke he wasn't in on? But Sam's face showed no humor, just cold, calculated cruelty. "I'm serious," Sam continued, enjoying the attention. "I paid good money to see Dean Martin, and instead I get this?" He made a dismissive gesture. "Frank, you should get up there. Show him how it's really done." Frank Sinatra went pale. He started to stand, perhaps to defuse the situation, but Sam pointed at him. "Sit down, Francis. I'm talking to your boy here." He turned back to Dean. "You know what your problem is, Dean? You think you're special. You think because you got a pretty voice and a nice suit, you're somebody. But you're not. You're nobody. You're just another singer who works for me." The humiliation was surgical, precise. Sam wasn't drunk or out of control. He was deliberately, methodically destroying Dean Martin in front of everyone who mattered in Las Vegas. Studio executives were in the audience, other entertainers, journalists, and Sam was making sure they all understood the message. Dean Martin, the cool king of Vegas, was just another employee who could be put in his place whenever Sam Giancana felt like it. Dean's face had gone completely neutral. That Dean Martin mask that hid everything he was feeling. He could walk off stage. He could try to make a joke. He could apologize and try to smooth things over. Those were his options. All of them involved backing down, accepting the humiliation, letting Sam win. Dean made a different choice. He walked to the edge of the stage, directly in front of Sam's table. The spotlight followed him. Every eye in the room was locked on this moment, and Dean spoke, his voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the Copa room. Sam, you're right about one thing. I do think I'm special. You want to know why? Because I'm standing on this stage because of talent. Because people pay to hear me sing. Because I worked my whole life to get here. He paused. You're sitting in that audience because your father was a criminal and you followed in his footsteps. You got your power by hurting people, by threatening people, by making people afraid. The room's atmosphere changed instantly. This wasn't just refusing to back down. This was counterattacking. Sam's face darkened. His men started to stand up, but Sam held up a hand, stopping them. He wanted to hear what Dean would say next. You come into my show, Dean continued, interrupt my performance, insult me in front of my audience, and you think I'm going to just take it? You think I'm going to smile and apologize and beg for your approval? Dean shook his head. That's not going to happen, Sam. Not tonight. Not ever. You're making a big mistake, Dean, Sam said quietly, but his voice carried the threat clearly. Maybe, Dean acknowledged, but at least I'm making it on my feet, not on my knees. He turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I want you all to understand something. I've been performing in Las Vegas for 10 years. And for 10 years, I've played by the rules, the mob's rules. I've been respectful. I've been careful. I've kept my mouth shut about things I've seen and heard. Because that's how you survive in this town. Frank Sinatra was now standing, looking panicked. Other Rat Pack members were frozen, unsure what to do. The audience was riveted, barely breathing. But you know what? Dean said. I'm done. I'm done pretending that this is okay. I'm done acting like it's normal for gangsters to own this city and everyone in it. I'm done being afraid. He looked directly at Sam. You can threaten me. You can try to destroy my career. You might even kill me. But you can't make me bow to you. Not anymore. Sam Giancana stood up slowly. You just ended your career in Vegas, Martin. You're done here. You'll never work in this town again. Then I'll work somewhere else, Dean said simply. Los Angeles, New York, London. Anywhere but here under your thumb. He set his microphone down on the stage, and the sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the silent room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. I'm sorry the show is ending early, but I refuse to perform in a room where I'm treated like property. He walked off the stage, just walked away from his own show, from his contract, from everything he'd built in Las Vegas. The audience sat in stunned silence. Sam Giancana looked like he'd been slapped. Frank rushed after Dean backstage. Dean, what the hell did you just do? Do you have any idea? I know exactly what I did. Dean interrupted, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I just committed career suicide, maybe actual suicide. But Frank, I couldn't stand there and take that. I couldn't let him humiliate me like that and just smile and keep singing. What kind of man would that make me? A living one, Frank said desperately. Dean, Sam Giancana doesn't make threats. He makes promises. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. He's going to... I know, Dean said quietly, but I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees. Within an hour, the story had spread throughout Las Vegas. Dean Martin had publicly defied Sam Giancana. He'd called out the mob in front of a packed house. He'd walked off his own show. The reactions were immediate and divided. Some people thought Dean was brave, a hero. Finally, someone had said what everyone was thinking. The mob controlled too much. They pushed entertainers around, treated them like property, and everyone just accepted it, because that's how Vegas worked. Others thought Dean was insane, suicidal. You didn't cross Sam Giancana and live to tell about it. Dean's career was over. His life might be over, and anyone who associated with him was in danger too. The Sands Hotel immediately suspended Dean's contract, pending review. Other Vegas hotels quietly let it be known that Dean Martin was no longer welcome. The blacklist was instant and total, just like Sam had promised. But something unexpected happened. The story made national news, and the way it was reported wasn't "Dean Martin insults mob boss." It was "Dean Martin stands up to mob intimidation." The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. People were tired of organized crime controlling Las Vegas. They were tired of reading about mob violence and corruption. And here was Dean Martin, one of the biggest stars in America, publicly saying, "No more." 3 days after the incident, Dean received a call from Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States. Kennedy had been conducting a war against organized crime, trying to break the mob's power, and he saw Dean's stand as an opportunity. "Mr. Martin," Kennedy said, "what you did took enormous courage, and I want you to know that the federal government is prepared to protect you. More than that, I want to work with you to change how Las Vegas operates." "What do you mean?" Dean asked. "I mean, we're going to use what happened to you as a catalyst for reform. We're going to push for new regulations, federal oversight of casinos, protection for entertainers. We're going to break the mob's control of Las Vegas, and you're going to help us do it." Over the next 6 months, Dean Martin became the face of a movement he never intended to start. He testified before Congress about mob influence in the entertainment industry. Not in detail, he wasn't a snitch, but about the general climate of fear and intimidation. He spoke to journalists about what it was like to work in Vegas, always looking over your shoulder, always wondering if you'd said or done something that would anger the wrong people. Other entertainers started coming forward, emboldened by Dean's stand. Sammy Davis Jr. talked about how he'd been forced to perform at private mob parties without pay. Lesser-known performers shared stories of threats, extortion, and violence. The testimony painted a picture of an industry completely controlled by organized crime. The federal government responded with the Gaming Control Act of 1962, which significantly increased federal oversight of Las Vegas casinos. It didn't eliminate mob influence overnight. That would take decades. But it was the beginning of the end. The FBI increased its presence in Vegas. Background checks for casino employees became mandatory. The corporate Vegas era was beginning, where legitimate companies would eventually replace mob ownership. But the most significant change was in the entertainment contracts. The Screen Actors Guild, pressured by public opinion and supported by Dean's testimony, negotiated new protections for performers working in Vegas. Contracts now included clauses protecting performers from interference during shows. They established grievance procedures. They created security protocols. Entertainers finally had some protection from mob intimidation. Sam Giancana never forgave Dean. For the rest of Sam's life, he was murdered in 1975. He refused to be in the same room as Dean Martin. He tried to have Dean blacklisted, but the public support was too strong. He tried to intimidate Dean through intermediaries, but the FBI protection made that difficult. In the end, all Sam could do was watch as the empire he'd helped build slowly crumbled, with Dean Martin's defiance as one of the first cracks in the foundation. Dean never returned to the Sands. He couldn't, not while it was still mob-controlled, but he continued performing. In Los Angeles, in New York, on television. His career didn't end. If anything, it evolved. He was no longer just a singer or a comedian. He was someone who stood for something, someone who'd risked everything for principle. Years later, in 1972, a young comedian named George Carlin met Dean at a party in Los Angeles. Carlin, who'd grown up in a rough neighborhood and understood mob mentality, asked Dean if he'd ever regretted what he did that night at the Sands. Dean thought about it for a long moment. "You know what I regret? I regret all the times I didn't do it. All the times I saw something wrong and stayed quiet. All the times I played it safe." He took a sip of his drink. "That night in 1962, that was the first time in my life I felt truly free, because I realized that fear only has power over you if you let it, and I decided not to let it anymore." "Even though it could have gotten you killed?" Carlin asked. "Especially because it could have gotten me killed," Dean replied. "Because once you're willing to risk everything, once you decide that some things are worth dying for, you're finally free. Nobody can control you anymore. Nobody can threaten you, because you've already accepted the worst that could happen." The story of February 12, 1962, became legend in Hollywood. The night Dean Martin stood up to Sam Giancana and changed the rules. But the real significance wasn't just that one moment of courage. It was what that moment inspired. Other industries started questioning mob influence. Labor unions pushed back against mob infiltration. Politicians found courage to prosecute organized crime more aggressively. All because one entertainer decided that being humiliated on stage wasn't acceptable, no matter who was doing the humiliating. Frank Sinatra, who'd been terrified that night, later said that watching Dean walk off that stage was the bravest thing he'd ever witnessed. "We all thought we had to play by their rules," Frank said in a 1990 interview. "We thought that was just the cost of working in Vegas. But Dean showed us that we didn't. He showed us that we had power too. The power to say no. The power to walk away. The power to demand respect." In 1995, when Dean Martin died, his obituaries mentioned the Rat Pack, his music, his movies. But the younger generation of entertainers remembered him for something else. For being the man who stood up to the mob when everyone else was too scared. For changing an industry that seemed unchangeable. For proving that talent and integrity were more powerful than threats and intimidation. The modern Las Vegas, the corporate, regulated, relatively clean Las Vegas, exists in part because of what Dean Martin did that night. The protections that performers now take for granted, the contracts that give them autonomy and security, those exist because Dean was willing to risk everything to demand them. Sam Giancana tried to humiliate Dean Martin in public. He tried to prove that entertainers were just property, that talent meant nothing compared to power, that fear would always win. But Dean's response, walking off that stage, speaking truth to power, refusing to be intimidated, proved Sam wrong. In the end, Sam Giancana died in his basement, shot in the back of the head by unknown assassins, his empire crumbling around him. Dean Martin died in his bed on Christmas Day, surrounded by the love and respect of an entire industry he'd helped to liberate. That's not just a victory. That's a revolution. A quiet revolution started by a man who refused to be humiliated, who chose dignity over safety, who understood that some things are worth risking everything for. On February 12, 1962, Sam Giancana walked into the Copa room, thinking he was going to remind Dean Martin, who was really in charge. Instead, he sparked a moment that would ultimately break the mob's stranglehold on Las Vegas and Hollywood. He tried to make Dean Martin look small. Instead, Dean stood up, literally and figuratively, and became a giant. That's the real story of the night. A mafia boss humiliated Dean Martin in public. Not the humiliation, but the response. Not the fear, but the courage. Not the end of something, but the beginning. The beginning of a new era where entertainers weren't property, where talent mattered more than intimidation, where saying no to power was possible. Dean Martin changed Hollywood that night, not by being the loudest or the toughest or the most famous, but by being the first one willing to walk away, by showing everyone that freedom is worth more than any paycheck, any career, any amount of success. And that lesson, that one moment of courage can change everything, is Dean Martin's greatest legacy. Greater than any song he ever sang, greater than any movie he ever made. The legacy of a man who refused to bow, even when bowing seemed like the only way to survive. Sometimes the coolest thing you can do is stand up, even when, especially when, everyone else is sitting down.